frosted windows in the morning. Can't find the sun, don't know where the wind blows so coldly. And as I wipe the snow from off the windowsill, I hear his voice. I will return. I will return. Springtime came to us so quickly. She stole under winter's cloak of gloom. Peacock feathers round her shoulders, she tore open the buds too soon. And she's taken you away on a steel ship, and I remember your blonde hair against the iron mast, black as death, and the dark clouds making the way along the rolling sea. I will return to you, I will return to you again. I will return to you, I will return to you again. The snow lies thick upon the ground. Weeping winter women wander through the streets, searching through snowflakes for something true. Icicles and pinnacles, frosted windows in the morning. Can't find the sun, don't know where the wind blows so coldly. And as I wipe the snow from off the windowsill, I hear his voice. I will return.
So, Robin, anything that you saw there,
Not
you
for
go,
long.
that's wrong, not for long. Was there anything that you saw there initially in those clips, those images, that you thought, well, that's not right, that's not what happened? Because there's a lot of stories about the Wicker Man, isn't there?
Yes, there are. Lots of stories. I think that the really important moments in the history of the Wicker Man was that once the film was finished, and we'd made up the final cut we intended to distribute, a classic film biz conspiracy within the company, a sort of boardroom putsch, started because a couple of the directors wanted to get their money out of British land, and they had to blame the managing director, who was a producer, Peter Snell, for making a disastrously bad film, The Wicker Man. Now, the other film that he'd made that year was Don't Look Now, and that had already been received extremely well, as it deserved to. And so they couldn't do that to that. And there was a famous interview with Michael Dealey, who actually ran the board. I think he was the chairman of the board. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah. And he had a visit from Christopher Lee, and Christopher Lee's wife was with him. And he made an extraordinary mistake, which won't altogether surprise you from what you know of Christopher Lee. he told Christopher Lee that he thought it was one of the worst films he'd ever seen, and that it was undistributable. Well, Christopher, naturally, who thought it was a big change in his career and a very good film, was very angry. But what he was particularly angry about was that Dealey just sat and didn't stand up for his wife. That was the ultimate sin. And those days may have gone, but it's a pity in some ways. And so Christopher took the film to the Festival of Film Fantastique in Paris, where it won the Grand Prix. And that was the turning point, because the critical community knew that there was a film there that at least the French really thought was terrific. And there must be something wrong going on at British Lion to condemn it. So that was the first really important moment. So he had to distribute it. He didn't want to distribute it. Dealey didn't. And so he put it out as a second feature to Don't Look Now. Well, now second features had to be shorter than the main feature. Otherwise the program was too long for the cinemas. And so he just took a pair of scissors to the film, and he cut out the whole of that first night when we see Christopher in the garden and the snails and all that. I particularly miss the snails, I must say, when that happened. And he made it a one-night film. So it went down from 72 hours to 24 hours. And that made it short enough. And that was all the British public ever saw until very recently, funnily enough. Probably only within the last decade have there been copies of the shorter, of the longer film here. Anyway, I went back to America, where I'd had most of my career, and I met with a lot of students who had been given the project by their professor to distribute a film, raise the money, distribute it, advertise it, do all the business side of it. And because of the prize it had won, and rave reviews in Variety and Hollywood Reporter and so on and so forth, they chose this film, which still hadn't been distributed in America. And they got together, they made a marvelous marketing plan, and they went to screenings with doctors and dentists, which are, by the way, the best way to raise money in the United States. Doctors and dentists have all the money. And they put together the distribution plan. The America in those days, they had sub-distributors, and so various parts of the states by population had sub-distributors. They organized all that, the students did.
Would this be about 1976, around about then, or was it later than that?
Yeah, no, about then. And the problem was, though, that I wouldn't put my name to it unless I'm allowed to restore it. So part of the money they raised had to give me enough money in order to do the restoration. Well, I had to go to Mike Dealey, the perpetrator, and for the negative, because that was the only way it could be distributed as far as I could see. And he said, it's been lost. You can't have it. And so what we were forced to do was to find a very, very good print. Well, a very famous American distributor of, on the whole, B pictures, called Corman, Roger Corman, and a person who created the careers of many great American directors like Bogdanovich. He had one print which we'd sent him, and which his editor had kept in his screening room, and it had only ever been projected once. And so it was sort of in a virgin condition, virtually. And we had to use that internegative after internegative in order to get back to something and which would cut and look like something on the screen. Well, now that whole of that first night that you just saw was that. It was from a print and we did it frame by frame. It was called the liquid gate process. Of course, today we could do it, with incredible ease. Well, incredible ease. It'll still be quite difficult with computerized techniques. So anyway, the resulting distribution, which was supported obviously by the American press, Christopher came with me, and we went around the whole United States, all the big cities. And the great thing about the US, and I think you can do it in this country too, is that every university and college has its own newspaper, has its own radio station, has its own television station. And they sit there waiting for a story. And boy, were we a story. So as a result, we were able to fill the various local cinemas and break house records. And I used to look at Variety every week. Variety is written in an arcane language you wouldn't believe, but my favourite word of theirs is boffo. Opened in Hartford, Connecticut, boffo, and then they gave the earnings for that particular week, and so that was the third really point of its fame. The Americans really created its fame in the teeth of Mr. Deedy. Anyway, rest his soul, I'm sure. He's no longer with us.
Well, as you've referred to Christopher Lee, it would be a bit remiss, not as if I'm after an anecdote, but with his recent passing and having watched that film, it's the first film you've seen him in since his passing, I guess, isn't it? And it was his favourite movie. Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you suddenly came to mind with your experience of working with him, maybe on this film or when you were with him on that tour, that makes you think, not sums up the man, that sounds really crass, but that came to mind tonight particularly?
Well, I mean, in a way, he had already been typecast in the Hammer films as a sort of patrician, figure, the sort of lord of misrule, but in a rather, ghoulish way, obviously. And he was very good at that. But he got bored, as he said in many of these interviews, with doing the same thing in effect. And because it had made money, people asked him to do it again and again and again. And when we offered him a film, it was really the first film he had, where he had a real part. And Lord Summerisle is based on real people who did experiments like that in the Western Isles. But the idea that someone as frankly glamorous as he, and with a sort of magus control of everything that happened in other people's lives, it was a very tempting role for him to play.
And also, he's very funny in that. He's got great comic timing, hasn't he?
Yes, he has. Yes, he has.
Which I think is a sign of a great actor, because people were laughing a lot at the start of the film.
Well, I have to pay tribute to my screenwriter in that film. Tony Schaffer did a marvelous screenplay for that, and we worked on it together. We'd been partners in a film company for 13 years before we made that film. So, there was quite a lot of rapport between us about that sort of thing. And only Peter Ustinov, of the people I've known or worked with, was funnier than Tony at his best. He was a great raconteur.
I'm just going to hand the microphone to Paul here, but was there anyone tonight that hadn't seen the film before? And just a hand up. I know that Chris hadn't. Okay. I mean, that's amazing, because a lot of people were laughing during the movie who know it, because it is a joke in a way, but then the power of the third act, which, as you said, is coming across. So, Paul, over to you. Anything you want to...
Hi, I'm Paul. I represent E17 Films and the Walthamstow Film Festival. I just got a question about, not necessarily about this film, because I know it's part of a trilogy, and I think, Robin, that you're making the third one now. Would you like to say something about part 3 of the trilogy?
Yes, I would. Why a trilogy anyway?
Exactly.
Yeah. I never wanted to make a a sequel or a prequel. Although I'm not against them, I think that, in the case of The Wicker Man, the sequel was clearly a disaster. And I have a private theory about why that was, because Tony Shaffer, who died about 10 years ago, I'm convinced, wherever he is, whether he's up or down, cursed that film. Because it's full of the people who made it were perfectly talented people who'd done perfectly talented good things. And yet in that case, they completely bombed. And so a certain amount of Schadenfreude watching that. But I think that the real problem with making sequels is that you have to add a whole series of really important, wonderful new ingredients. And my favorite remake is the Thomas Crown Affair. Thomas Crown Affair was wonderful the first time, but the second time they added the art direction, which was so beautiful and exciting, and the music as well. And of course, I fell immediately in love with Miss Russo, as I think most men of my age did, and 40 or 50 at that time.
I think her husband did as well, apparently. That's
So I think that it had to be as cursed. It didn't have to do with that lack of talent. It just,
So do you think Anthony Shaffer has let you off on Wrath of the Gods then? He's going to give you a pass?
Well, I have to feel nervous about that, but that's not a sequel.
No, of course.
And nor was The Wicker Tree. What I'm interested in this trilogy is, I think that in The Wicker Man, and I'd be interested if anyone in the audience disagrees with this, and you may, I think one of the important ingredients in it, and one of the things that the people who made the remake completely missed, is that it does use humour to effect. And some of the humour is made to actually advancing the plot. And it does use music, and the lyrics as well, advance the plot. And it does use mystery of the kind that is embodied in the hair, and it advances the plot. And I think that is a thing that you can do in a film, a horror film, if it is a horror film, and not everyone would think it was, and save the horror for the end, when you've built up all these sleight of hand red herrings, and then go for the whammy at the end, which I think this film does quite successfully. So I've tried to do that in the second film. I think I was perhaps too low key at the end of that. For me, it was a very, I won't bore you with telling you more about that, but it was not a strong enough aid to the imagination at the end. For me, it was absolutely ghastly at the end. I mean, ghastly in the sense that it really was frightening. And in this new film, which also ends with a great burning, I hope that we've succeeded with those ingredients of comedy and little sex and music-driven plot. I hope we've succeeded in doing that in the script. What I now have to do is to make the damn thing.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking tonight when I met you at the station. You'd never been to Walthamstow before, have you?
No.
So I felt a bit like, well, let's welcome him. I felt a bit like we were Lord Summerisle inviting you up to the island a little bit, actually.
I was beginning to wonder on that walk.
So if we can all, if we can all put our animal masks on now, we can all turn and face him. in that little package that I cut to be an aid to this evening, and by all means feel free to ask questions in a second about what you want to ask about, but what I'm really interested in is that, like the Shirley Jackson lottery story, or The Vanishing, the Dutch film, it's got a great ending. And you said that Anthony Sheffer liked games. And the whole film works as a joke in reverse, which is brilliant. You know the ending, if you know the ending, and it has that amazing punch. And I don't think personally there's a more brilliant ending to any movie in this country that's been made. And I think it's a testimony to you that if you didn't make any more movies, you are, but you made The Wicker Man. You could get that T-shirt done. And you could say to anyone, I made The Wicker Man. And that is such a closing statement from anybody. So I just think props to you for that film 100%, because it's a beautifully shot film. It's beautifully tone managed. And what I'd also say as well, the casting of the extras is beautiful, and the elegance of the camera work. It may have been Harry, it may have been you, but I think that's a remarkable first feature, and a feature to have done. So I'm so happy that we've all seen it together. Are there any questions we can throw out to the audience that want to ask anything? So at the back, nice and loud, I can repeat it.
It's a very unique movie, and I'm wondering what his influences were, or what your influences were before filming it.
As a director?
As a director.
So the question is, I mean, you had an experience in advertising in the 60s, a sort of Mad Men period when there was a lot of money to make, and it shows it's very quick filming in that sense. What were your influences for the film as you were, before you made the film, and as you made the film? Were there any influences that came to mind, other directors?
Well, I was educated as an artist, and so I was interested in making the film partly because I thought there was no reason why horror films, which were very much in vogue then, and we were trying to turn the tables on Hammer a bit, shouldn't be beautiful. And I like to think the film is beautiful, scene after scene after scene, and that was a great attraction of doing it for me, as a painter and drawer. But also my other avocation is as a writer. I mean, I write novels, so I did most of the research for that film. But Tony and I really invented the script together, and he wrote that wonderful dialogue for it. I mean, the scene between Christopher and the policeman is wonderfully funny in the best sense, I think. I mean, it's wonderfully witty, if you like. I mean, the Holy Ghost line is really, I think, and we all thought at the time, is rather special. Also, I think Tony did many other things, but he only really wrote one really successful play, which was Sleuth. And Sleuth, you referred to games. Mm-hmm. Sleuth, of course, is a game. And Tony and I, in the 13 years that we worked together, I think we were the most successful commercials company almost worldwide. We had offices in Frankfurt, Milan, Paris, New York, London. And it was a license to print money making commercials in those days. It was cost plus 40%. Mm-hmm. Think of a business which is cost plus 40%.
Wow.
Yeah, it is wow. But tax was over 90%. Well, I mean...
not wow.
No, I mean, you could be spending hundreds of thousands a year and end up with 5,000.
Wow.
Mr. Wilson was then in power. Anyway, all those influences, advertising is a fascinating business if you have the latitude to really let your imagination roam. Mm-hmm. And because each problem is different. You have to make a Guinness commercial or a Schweppes commercial or a Chevrolet commercial or, a British Airways commercial. Mm-hmm. The problems are all different. And it's a wonderful proving ground for your mind when it comes to making features. It's just is rather more profitable than making features.
As you watch the film tonight, as you've seen many times, do you forget the brutal shooting elements of what happened and that was a tough day? I mean, because it's quite a traumatic shoot. I mean, it happened very quickly, didn't it? It was put into production partly because of the unions they gathered to get the film going. It was shot in the winter. As you were directing the film, and there were the many egos around you, of course your own ego, which is included in it, did you find it an enjoyable experience making that film?
Most of the time, yes. I had a very good crew. Harry Waxman and I did not get on, partly because Harry Waxman was, I think he was an Orthodox Jew, and he was quite religious.
Mm-hmm.
And he didn't like the idea of our being sacrilegious about Christianity. I mean, his sense of religion and the properness of religion extended to that. So I would constantly have to say, well, this is a pagan society and it stands against this particular aspect of Christianity. And that chess game between the two is quite legitimate for the Christians as it is for the pagans. But he was never very happy with that. But he was hard because he was absolutely brilliant at special effects. What we would now do with CGI, with blue background and all that, he could do in all sorts of ways that we use then. I won't bore you with the various techniques, but he was very good at all of them.
And that was for the bonfire sequence mainly, with it. They were worried it wasn't going to work. Was that right?
That's right. And what he did was, of course, it wasn't a trick. I mean, he was hard to do that sequence with tricks. And on the night, or on the day, almost night, he put the camera in the right place, exactly the right place. And we were all incredibly lucky. And when the Wicker Man burnt, it collapsed. Well, that we influenced at least. And it collapsed right into the path to the sun. I mean, it would have taken an enormous amount of effort. It could have been done, and he would have been able to do it. But he did it just by putting the camera in the right place. And the sun in the right place.
Sun was in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
Well, there's that expression, isn't it, with films that you need the luck. And I think in the filming, you had the luck of the filming.
It was shot in November, December, from April, May.
And it shouldn't have worked, really,
No,
should
it shouldn't. I mean, those orchards you saw, I shot in South Africa.
Yeah. And you also did some filming in David Hemming's garden in Kent, that's right, isn't it?
Yes.
How did that come about? Was David Hemmings ever going to play the Howie role?
Yes, he was. But he just wasn't available when we came to make the film. You know, that's always the way. You have an actor or actress you want to use, and he or she is taken just when you have to go because the money is there and everything else is there. I mean, you know, the extent to which this business revolves around money is, you know, obviously extraordinarily important.
And also he had money because of Hemdale, and he had the garden. You filmed in the garden, so that footage is in the film. That's his garden in Kent.
It was called something like Hush House Manor. Hush House Manor. And it was filled with, as I remember it, very good fakes of famous expressionists. So you looked around and there was, you know, a Picasso or a Monet or whatever, but it wasn't. But I mean, he wasn't pretending it was. It was, you know, just a special collection of fakes.
And the footage in the garden ends up in the film, doesn't it? So you filmed in his garden in Kent, and you used that as publicity. And then when you came to, as pre-filming material.
I went down to visit him when we were thinking of working together, and I saw this wonderful phallus in the garden and couldn't resist it. Well, I mean, where would you find such a thing?
And you won't hear that said very often in Walthamstow on a Friday night, will you?
Also promoting this nice pregnant ladies to go touching the trees because it was all there, that moment.
But that's the magic of the film, as we all probably notice when you see it on the screen, is that it's a very elegant, well-composed, well-shot film. And many first features, even now, that they're overcut, and that isn't. That's a very, I mean, it is a commercial director's movie. He's got the shot, we've got it, and I think that's a testimony again to the longevity of the film. The symbols are in there, but it's very beautifully put together.
Well, the commercials are very demanding.
Yeah.
And, you know, I mean, it's the five-finger exercises, if you like, of the feature business.
Can you explain that sort of?
Well, I mean, if commercials are for the most part either 30 seconds or a minute long, which is surprisingly long, actually, if you really get down to it, putting the images together, and they have to tell their story in that short time. Well, feature films are full of episodes. For instance, take the sequence with the frog, which actually turned out to be a toad. My prop man told me afterwards that it was a toad. And of course, it's supposed to be a frog in your throat. However, we haven't told anyone that, because I've told you.
Keep it to yourselves. Yeah. And that was a short sequence, as you said, that sold itself.
I mean, that was probably no longer than 30 seconds, the whole thing. Well, doing those quite often in your film are like putting, the right kind of currants in the bun.
Yeah. I think it is a perfect argument for a good commercials director can make a feature film,
I just, for me, in the film, I find the opening sequence when he's flying across the islands really beautiful. I find the scene of the Willow song with Britt Eklund, that's so sexually charged. And then the final scene of the Wicker Man burning, brilliant. But I find Edward Woodward's acting really riveting and really good to watch. Was he good to work with?
Edward, dear Christopher.
Yeah. Let's have a round of applause to Edward Woodward, of course. We've done really. We don't want Anthony Sheffer come up, do we? We want to make sure that we're happy.
Well, you see, there are actors. I don't know if you ever saw a film called The Man Who Would Be King. A wonderful film with
Sean Connery
and
Michael Caine. Directed by John Huston.
I remember, I think they both had the same agent, which quite often happens in films, because that's how the money is put together. And the agent said to me, the interesting thing about those two is that Connery is not by any means the greater actor, but you can't help looking at him when the two of them on the screen together. There's a very good sequence in The Wicker Man, which is, although I think perhaps in sheer acting power, you could say that Edward was the greater actor, but he was never a film star. And Christopher was every inch of a film star. And you couldn't help, when you had those two on the screen together, couldn't help looking at Christopher. Yes.
Well, that's why we show those clips of Christopher. He's an iconic face.
Yes, he is, yes. I mean, he's a perfectly good actor. I'm not saying he wasn't a very good actor. But the reason people hired him and used him in films was because he had this sort of stellar power with his face, and particularly with his voice.
Well, that very first Dracula film with Terence Fisher, when he walks out, you don't realise what a tremendously powerful move that is from an actor at that time in what was a very parochial cinema. And I think your film has the power of symbols. We talked a bit earlier on about the final image of the film, which you're now talking about with the Wrath of the Gods. And I wonder at the moment, in the culture we live in where so much is commodified, whether the power of the Wicker Man grows because symbols begin to speak to us in a different way now because we're so information-led. Is there something that you feel with that film particularly? There are so many symbols in there which are accurate, and you looked at the Golden Bough. What's your feeling now about working in cinema using those ancient symbols?
Well, I think they're always useful. I mean, after all, way back, someone decided to call Monday the Moon Day, or the Moon Day Monday. They decided for the same thing with Sunday. They were talking about gods. You know, the whole of the week, most of the months. And they've never gone away. You know, they've been useful labels for the basic time measures of our lives. And we never think about it. So the answer, I think, is that is a perpetual fact and probably always will be. And we keep on adding to them. We keep on. It's funny, for instance, that now that we're all into computers, a whole new language, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which runs parallel to English or French or German or whatever, has just arrived overnight. And it goes on arriving every day as far as I'm concerned.
We talked a bit about Abel Gantzer on silent movies, and yours is a very visual film. And yesterday when I was cutting the sequence, one of my kids looked over the shoulder and I kept it hidden from them, and they saw the Wicker Man image. What's that? And I think when I was a kid, I thought it was called the Wicked Man for a long time. Because back in the 70s, there was no video, so you missed it. And I was thinking, with the faceless quality of the Wicker Man, was that... I know that there's some discussion about how it came to be, but it's such an iconic faceless image, isn't it?
I think it's much better when it is faceless. I mean, I've forgotten, but I've seen it very recently, that 18th century drawing, which does have a face.
About the Druids, yeah.
Yes. And I think that it's faceless makes it more godlike, or something of the gods.
And the animals. I like the animals inside as well.
Yes.
The cows and the geese and inside the Wicker Man.
And is it true that the goat was peeing on Edward Woodward and you? Is that true?
And me, yes. Well, actually, you would hardly blame the goat.
I'd blame you.
The man was on fire. Yes, it had to be an Anglican church. And there are very few in Scotland. I had a problem with that. And I had to play the priest. That figure standing there in a cassock is me. My friend on my left put his finger on it in the presentation he made. There's a man called Fraser, The Golden Bough. The Golden Bough is the longest detective story you can ever endure. It's 15 volumes, I think.
And that was the abridged one we saw. So you read 15, didn't you?
Yes, I read the whole thing. But fortunately, I was ill in hospital, and it was a marvelous distraction because we were preparing for the film. And that detective story goes back and back and back through all our beliefs and our myths and our fairy stories. Until you get right to the, almost, if you can find it, the original myth, fairy story, that we must have sat round a campfire and told each other and believed. Very interestingly, Apocalypse Now, if you've seen that film, what Coppola does there is he goes back, apart from going up the Mekong all the time, he goes back and back and back until finally he comes to somebody who actually figures in the Golden Bough, which is the knight who defends the Golden Bough, the final habitation of the god. And it is, of course, Brando who plays that role. And Coppola cheats there because he actually shows you, like I'm showing you now, the cover of the book, the Golden Bough, to tell you how clever he's been, and he's actually, that's what it's all been about. Well, we certainly haven't done that, but what we've done is we've mined the Golden Bough for all those symbols for the game which so attracted Tony Schaffer, who in his play Sleuth had a wonderful game between two men. In our business lives, in all those years that he and I worked together, we constantly played games with each other. And the games were sometimes cruel, sometimes funny. I'm going to give you an example. I'd been filming in Rome and I was exhausted and my wife was with me. And I called him up in London and I said, I need to go somewhere and really rest and relax. And he said, oh, I know just the place. I'll call you back tomorrow. He called back and he gave me the place, which was in Sicily. So I drove the whole length of Italy from Rome to Sicily, got to the place that he recommended as being the perfect place for us to have a rest, drove up the drive, And I could hear, as I drove up the drive, a German, it turned out to be a German regiment having a reunion, an SS regiment, and they were going, hoch, 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 with their steins of beer. And so I turned round and drove back to Rome. And that was at least 2 points to him. My wife wasn't too pleased about that game. And then I had a wonderful riposte for that. And this goes to the heart of the Wicker Man in a way. My riposte was, we were shooting, all this is commercials. We were shooting commercials in the coffee plantation mountains of Puerto Rico in the Caribbean. And he was coming down from San Juan. I'd sent a jeep for him. And from the hacienda's terrace, I could see his jeep arriving. And I knew he was rather short-sighted. I also knew that he'd never been on a horse in his life. He was, raised in Hampstead, which is not horse country. And I had a mule there for him with a local person who spoke no English. And he couldn't see that we were just up the path on the terrace with our gins and tonics and rums and things. And so he was forced to get on the mule. And for the next 2 or 3 hours, we watched the Puerto Rican gentleman leading him around all the hills with this very rebellious mule. When he was finally let off by the gates, and we walked down with a drink for him, and he could see what had actually happened, he wasn't pleased. I mean, that was probably 2 marks for me. But we did this all the time.
Should we throw it out to another question from the
Yes.
audience? Go ahead, Fanny.
No, it certainly wasn't my plan.
Just say that Brit was dubbed, and also she was rebottomed as well, wasn't she?
No, well, that was the only reason why we shot that. There's only one cut in there of somebody else's bottom. Is because, I believe if you're going to do a nude scene with anyone, you have to show them what they're going to see through the... So the double goes all the way around and the angles, and the person, in Brit's case, saw exactly what we were going to see of her. And she said, you can't shoot my ass because it's like a ski slope. And so all the rest of the choreography is pretty much of her front or her side, and a very nice front and side she has. But I had to have her turn round, particularly when she was hammering on the door. I couldn't. She wouldn't do that. So we went down to Glasgow and we went round all the strip clubs until we found somebody who had a back which is a sort of verisimilitude of Brit, and she came out, and the owner of the club, who let her go, said, I hope you get her back tomorrow because it's all very soon. She's my best stripper. And so we honestly said, I think, that we would get her back as soon as possible. To my horror, 2 weeks later, she was still with the crew.
How about her voice? Was it Brit's voice?
As far as I'm concerned, it was Brit's voice.
There's a question over there, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, earlier you talked about Harry's reaction to the religious elements of it, and I wonder what audiences like at the time, especially in America, they're much more religious than us.
Well, that is actually, in a way, quite strange. I was saying to you just a moment ago that we had prayer breakfasts as we were travelling through the south. We'd arrive in a town where we were going to open the picture, and then there would be a prayer breakfast, which is a thing unknown, I think, in this country, but in America quite common. And the Catholic priest and the Baptist minister and so on come, and you show them the film, and if they want to denounce it from the pulpit, they can. In this case, they thought it was terrific because it was the best, they felt, film representation of resurrection. In fact, very few films deal with resurrection, but we did remember there's scenes of Christopher and Howie sort of looking over his shoulder and shouting about what he believed. They were thrilled with that, and it sort of made them forget about the nudity and that sort of thing.
And in 1974, was it a blow for you when it didn't ignite with the audiences? I mean, it must have been difficult.
In this country, you mean?
Yes, when it was shown here with the reaction.
Well, no, because half the film had been cut out of it. Mm-hmm. I'd have been surprised if it had, really.
So once the cutting had happened, you almost expected it to be that situation, you felt?
It's still got very good reviews here. It's just that it was deliberately downloaded to a B movie by the management. And so once managements, because the film library was sold on and on between companies, realized that it was making plenty of money in the States because it was on television all the time,
Yeah, I wondered, do you think it's still possible to make a film that's a cult film that doesn't reference other films? Because when The Wicker Man came out, I think obviously writing was giving the inspiration for it, not other films, so it doesn't reference other films. But especially when the remake came out, which was awful, I wonder if it's possible to make a film that is that sort of unique, that doesn't reference.
Well, I think it should be.
I'll just read the question. The question is, do you think it's possible to make a film as unique as that now, bear in mind we're so aware of other films?
Well, I think it is. I really think it is. And that's why I wanted to make two more, in order to emphasize that I really like that genre. I like to be able to throw comedy in. I like to be able to, put it's a mystery and a little peck of sex. Because that's what life is about. I mean, that's what our lives are like. If you write a horror film which is just horror all the way through, it's pretty boring. Because people aren't like that.
But to know it would have to fit into a genre, wouldn't it? It doesn't really fit into a genre.
It is its own genre. I mean, that is, to be frank with you, that's what I'm trying to establish. And in this new film, very much so.
And with The Wrath of the Gods, you're now doing a crowdfunding campaign, is that right? You started filming that to raise money for that project.
Yes. Well, I'm about to do it. We're hoping to launch the crowdfunding thing on the 1st of July.
How much do you need, Robin? How much do you need?
Can we say that here?
Yes, you can. I will quickly. Is there anyone who doesn't know about crowdfunding?
We're aware of crowdfunding here, aren't we? We know crowdfunding yet.
You don't know about crowdfunding?
We do know crowdfunding yet. We're aware of it.
Well, the thing about crowdfunding is that there are many approaches. I mean, there's Indiegogo, and there is Kickstarter and various others. The one we're using is Indiegogo, which actually, funny enough, is backed by Richard Branson. And it's a San Francisco company. And it is, after all, just another way of producing venture capital. And the campaign that we are doing, in effect, encourages people in return for gifts. For instance, there's a new edition of my book of The Wicker Man. Is one of the gifts, and people get that, and it's signed and all that sort of thing. And then the special DVDs, special posters, all of those. People get those in return for quite small amounts of money. We're talking about £20 or £30 or something like that. That is all they get. They get the object. And if they want to do this for £20 or £30 and get a regular report from the set and pictures of the stars and all those things, we provide that. What we don't provide are shares. So we are we end up at that point of the financing with considerable freedom to change script and things like that if we feel we need to, because we're in control of the money. So that's the financial side of it, if you like. What we have to do is to make a good fist of explaining why we're making the film, what is special about it, and why the particular tranche of money. Now, in my case, the crowdfunding we're about to do is to raise the money for a number of special things. A big factor in my film is steampunk. And steampunk, in many cases, needs to be made. Steampunk doesn't have steam at the moment. What it has is it makes Victorian objects, 19th century objects, out of artifacts and inventions which are completely contemporary to today. It's retro in that respect. And it's a very popular art form, particularly in the United States, and France, and here. There was a huge, very good exhibition in Oxford of it recently. Anyway, that I need to raise money to build a Viking ship, which is not part of a normal budget. I need money for the steampunk itself, to convert various objects into things which actually work on steam, like a helicopter, like a motorbike. And that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of investment, but it's not part of a normal film budget. Do you see what I mean? And so I'm raising initially about 300,000 for that, for those objects and so on. Indiegogo has a system whereby in September, in the fall, I can raise another lot of money for 2 of my stars. I've got the film cast pretty much, but I do need 2 fairly major stars.
Can you say who they are? Is that not possible?
Yeah.
Or is that not a question to answer?
Yeah, it's not a question.
Okay.
I have to deal with the agents.
Sure, I understand.
No, that's not possible, unfortunately. But I've got people that I've used before. I've even got an actress who's now a lady of a certain age, as the French say, which is saying I like, actually. And the little girl who had the beetle that went round and round,
Daisy, yeah?
Daisy, is now a woman of 60. And she's a very good actress. I used her in my last film, and I'm going to use her again in another role.
So I was going to say, if any Walthamstow entrepreneurs look at the flyer, I mean, we were saying earlier that you could make a beer called Wrath of the Gods, couldn't we? We could do a Wicker Man ale, and Robin's contactable via this. One question more from the audience before we probably finish the second at the front there, sorry.
Yeah, just saying, as a mature filmmaker, do you have any criticisms of this younger film?
Are you suggesting I'm not the first flush of my youth?
On the contrary, I'm saying you are obviously at the height of your powers now, and when you made this film as a young man,
Yes.
is there anything you would change now?
Michael Dealey.
I would alter him considerably. Yes. No, I think what I would do is change. Now, I'm not talking about the British or the French or countries which have minor film industries, which we do here already, and not go for financing which depends on tax, and where people are investing in a project simply because they want, to be free of tax on that particular sum of money in 5 years' time, that sort of thing. I think that's very harmful. And in this country, we have scads of films sitting on shelves which will never be seen. Not necessarily because they're not worth seeing, but simply because the people who invested them don't even really care. Pinewood is almost, well, I mustn't say that.
But do you have anything, any criticisms of, do you look at something and say, oh, I wish I'd done that differently? Is there a scene you'd like to reshoot now? You can be perfectly content with it. It is a very, very good film.
Actually, in my case, I did a musical in the theatre in the 80s, and I wish I'd done it differently. But I'm a very Anglo-American person, and I would have done it as an American musical rather than a British musical. I think the Americans are better at musicals than we are on the whole, and I think the record shows that that's true. And I would have used more of their talent in that musical if I'd had a chance to. I haven't had that experience with the film.
What about with the Wicker Man? With the Wicker Man, was there any scenes in the film that you look at now and think maybe I could change that a little bit?
I've already cut them out.
Which is a very good answer. One question I'd like to run by is in the Complete Angler, the pub, when you were telling the story, is it true that George Sanders overheard and joined in the conversation, or is that just a little...
No, that's true.
So what was the... Because, I mean, the lightning moment of the story when you've got it, which is what we watched, the whole thing is a great story. When it came to life, was that the night in the pub you first shared it with you?
No, yes. What happened was I used to have an island at Maidenhead called Bolter's Lock Island. It wasn't obviously it was the Locks Island, but the other end of the island we had a house. So we had the weir on one side and the river on the other. We had to row over every morning to collect our groceries from the other bank. And Tony and I spent a long weekend there inventing the story of the Wicker Man, but very much with the game, with his game mind, because he was a much more into games than me, in spite of their silly games we played with each other. And so out of that, we had exactly what we thought was the right plot, and our long-suffering wives we took to dinner to tell them the story. And we went to Monkey Island, which is, as you know, further downriver, upriver, I suppose it is. No, downriver. And we tell them the story. And the person sitting next to us at the next table was George Sanders.
Who was the voice of Shere Khan in lots of movies, you know the actor from...
Yes, oh, wonderful.
And did he join in the conversation? That sounded wonderful. What was...
Well, sort of, yes, yeah, sort of, yeah.
Any final questions before we wrap up with Robin's time?
Well, very briefly, Robin, you were talking about this new way of raising funds for filmmaking that you embrace for your next project. And are you looking at alternative ways of distribution for this project?
No. No. Well, having said that, I think the cinema is still alive and well. So I wouldn't make a film just for other media, if you know what I mean. And since my budget is going to be eventually about $6 million, I couldn't afford to, because I would never recoup. But I think the whole distribution business for books, for music, for films are all going in a sort of flux at the moment. You would perhaps agree, and films particularly have now to be distributable in half a dozen different media if they're going to be successful financially. I also think that we have to be very attentive to foreign markets to make films that other countries will want to see. I mean, we're incredibly lucky that we have the English language, of course, which is a vast advantage. But it's interesting to look at the Scandinavians, at the Danes and the Swedes, who are now coming on strong with these mini-series of theirs. And people no longer mind subtitles.
Yes. Yeah. They're confident.
Yeah. And those series are wonderfully successful and deservedly so. So I think we should do more of that.
So a final question about Christopher Lee and the film. What's your favourite memory of working with him on The Wicker Man? And is there a favourite memory that comes to mind, a particular moment when you worked with him that you think watching the film tonight you remember that section?
Christopher was a great raconteur, but when he told a story he could go on and on and on. And there was a journalist who was haunting us when we were making The Wicker Man, and she constantly wanted to get why wouldn't she? It was her job, an interview with the great man, and I was finding her a bit of a pain because she was constantly coming to me for help in this, and I couldn't do anything about it, and so finally he was in his Winnebago. He had a rather splendid Winnebago, and I said, I've arranged for you to go in, but you must, I think, do one thing. When you get in there, tell him that you really want to hear the story of his life.
Well, thank you for a fitting tribute to this week, and for us a wonderful evening. And again, I'm sure we can all agree that's a remarkable film. And get the T-shirt that said "I made the Wicker Man," and people will always know that. It's wonderful. And good luck with Wrath of the Gods. Everyone, check out the information. And a big round of applause to Robin, to Lisa, and Paul and Nick. And thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
I hope that you will tell your friends about the Wrath of the Gods, and we hope to launch on the 1st of July, and so it will, its various aspects on the net and Twitter and Facebook and all that, about which I am only just learning.
Thank you, Robin, again. Thank you very much.